welcome to Straight Talk with Jon Brunson. Well, let's get into it here. All right. So, I got one question, so it must be a lot to it. So Joe Sands from Illinois asks, can you discuss deer scouting? Early season rut, late season, terrain breaks, scrapes and primary scrapes, rubs, water, feeding and supplementation, and trail cams. Okay. Yeah. A lot to talk about. Okay, well, let's we'll start with early season. So, scouting for us has definitely changed. I've hunted whitetails all my life. Growing up, hunted a lot, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, obviously from Florida. And it was really, late 20s till we got really outside of those states. And then we started doing it for a living 21 years ago. And then of course that changed things because now our whitetail hunting is not local where we were spending a lot of time on the property. It's, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, so forth and so on. So I would say our style or technique of early season scouting or scouting period has definitely evolved because the big difference now is we were on the property a lot in the early days, and now we may not, we may be on this property once a year to hunting. So, the other thing that's obviously changed is technology. I think back to the early days, no trail cams, blah, 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 whole different animal. So that's definitely changed things. It's probably been the one thing that's changed scouting the most. And it's definitely, no matter whether you live on a farm or, have to travel and you're there, once, twice, a few times a year, the cell cam, or the trail camera period has changed the game for us. It is our number one scouting tool, and of course now it's the cell cams. So let's talk about early season. Early season, again, for us, we're managing long distance. And with just the finally the amazing invention of cell cams. Think back to the early days. Imagine just trying to think ahead. Imagine the days you're sitting at home getting pictures on your, live pictures and videos on your phone from, Texas, Wyoming, Illinois. It's wild when you really think back to the early days, pre-cameras. But, for us, it's really, it's cell cams. If we're hunting with an outfitter or someone we've hunted with a lot, then we're depending a lot on what they tell us, but we carry, anyone that follows has probably heard me say this a few times. We carry like 3 cell cams with us on every trip. So even if we think we know what's going on, what's real important is what's going on now, maybe not even so much a week ago. So, we'll put those cameras out, we'll pick an A, B, and C stand, and, we'll put cameras at all 3 stands. We'll start the hunt on our A stand because that's the stand we think is the best. And while we're hunting one of our 3 top pick stands, the other 2, we have a camera on them and we're getting pictures and video. So not to make a move immediately, but like a perfect example was, I think, Missouri last year. We got in, picked a 1, 2, 3 stand, put our cameras up. Our third choice stand, which was like what we thought was our third less likely place to kill a deer. We ended up sitting our A stand that first evening, and an hour before light, boom, 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 we're getting pictures from our C stand. The third pick stand that we didn't think a whole lot. We thought, maybe this little food plot, maybe stuff's coming in here. Hour before light, shooter bucks in there. So the next day we hunted the same stand we did the night before. Didn't want to booger anything up. Made a move midday over to our C stand, hopped in a blind, just about on cue. Buck came out, Gina smoked it with her bow, and that's a perfect example of a deer that we killed because of our cell cams. So for us, it's it's finding the right places to put those cell cams. So early season, we're just looking at travel corridors, water. It really depends on what's going on with the property. Food sources. We're really just trying to trying to pick early off season, early season. Say preseason, before hunting season. We're really just trying to. Because we'll run cameras, we'll go drop cameras on our places in June, July, and then we won't check them until we come back and hunt them in the fall. So I would say before the season kicks off, it's, travel corridors, water, food sources, really just trying to figure out what's there, early season, we're really still going off of that information leading up to opening day, because for us, there's not really an early season for us, meaning, and I know a lot of people won't understand this, but, hunting for a living with whitetails being your core focus and bow hunting being your core focus, early season can just break you, and when you're doing it for a living and every trip is money and it's a business, we're trying to set up the highest odds with our hunts as far as places, as far as timing of the year. And again, we're hunting fair chase. So it's, we've got to figure them out. So early season doesn't really exist for us because about 13 years ago, like Gene and I literally swore off whitetail hunting early season. I'm not saying you can't kill big ones early season. Guys do it all the time. For us, especially managing farms long distance, and an early season hunt for us isn't just running out the back door. It's, crew on a plane, flying to Kansas, rental cars, blah, 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 blah. It just got, it was too inconsistent. 2 days before opening season, oh man, you've got them all figured out. And then, acorns drop. They're cutting the bean fields. They're cutting the cornfields. I mean, it's just, I don't know how many times early in our careers we'd have everything perfect and be so excited. We'd get there and it's like, okay, well, they cut the corn yesterday, or, acorns started dropping 2 days ago. And then it's like, you're done. I mean, it's really tough unless you get lucky. So we swore off early whitetail hunting, and we didn't do an early season whitetail hunt for probably 10 years, because that was about 5 years ago when we started doing the Kentucky hunt, and that's the only early season whitetail hunt we do. So historically, we would not hunt our first whitetails until November 1st. Now, the tail end of October is great, and really the only reason we didn't kick it off then was because our youngest son's birthday is on Halloween, so we were always home for that. So we always kicked off November 1st as far as our whitetail season. We killed all our whitetails in November. But again, with us being a business, that early season, we're not sitting around. We're hunting mule deer, we're hunting elk, we're antelope. We're doing other things to do our job and get content. So for us to shift gears and just kind of swear off whitetails early season, it still worked out for us. And again, we did not go backwards at all in the amount of whitetails we were killing a year. We were just doing it a lot more efficiently. Early season, again, I just, depending on, early season, food sources, water sources. Again, I fall back on preseason. You've got those cameras going. They're already really, on my plan, they're already focused on food and water and travel corridors. So just like Kentucky, which is now the only early season hunt we do, we're trying to figure them out, and we're trying to nail one down. Like, we're not heading to early season Kentucky going, oh geez, I wonder what, what's going on. I wonder, where we're going to sit. I wonder what's happening. I mean, we've got some bucks nailed down, and even with that, it's tough. I mean, we've hunted early season Kentucky, I'd say 5 or 6 years now, and I've killed. I've killed three. I've killed 3 really nice bucks. Gina hasn't killed a buck, and that's 5 or 6 years. So, but we've got it pretty much nailed down. So, and we get there again, you know, unless, unless the acorns just dropped, or, all of a sudden they're cutting fields all around you. If you've got them figured out, you've just, again, it's a chess game. You got to get in there and you got to try and kill one. And opening the season, again, we get drastic sometimes, if, if something's more of an evening stand, or let's say they're in there morning and night, no problem. They're in there morning and night, and we know we're probably not going to be able to get in there in the morning without pushing them out. We don't hunt that morning. It's hard, it's opening day, you're anxious, but we'll wait and hunt that evening. Or if they're in there in the morning, but it's like, okay, these bucks are coming off the fields, and they're down here on the protein and stuff, at 4 a.m., 4:30, hey, an hour and a half before light, then, don't get us wrong, we've been known to get up at 3 a.m. and go get in our stand. I actually killed one of my deer in Kentucky doing that. Gina wasn't happy about it, but we got up like 3 a.m. We went down, boom, scent free, all that, no flashlight, sneak right in, get in your stand. We're in our stand, at 3:30. The earliest the bucks were showing up was 4. 4 o'clock rolls around, 4:35. It's dark. You can hear deer. You can hear them eating and moving around, and they're right there. And then I think the first time we tried that in Kentucky, I killed a big velvet buck. Worst case scenario is they leave before light, and you didn't kill a deer, but you didn't booger your spot. You didn't burn that spot up, and that's what's important. So preseason, early season, I'd say that was our kind of focus on how we would scout. Let's see here. Okay. Rut. Again, he's asking about scouting, but when you start getting into deer season, it's you're scouting, but you're trying to figure one out. So with the rut, we shift gears. Obviously, we're not focused, like we were early season. We're looking for deer activity. Okay, like I'm not a big fan of, we found a great scrape, let's go hunt over it, or found a nice scrape line, let's go hunt over it. Personally, being a core bow hunter, I'm not big on that philosophy, because I just feel like, unless they're just on fire, I just feel like most of the time they're making those scrapes at night. I've just not had a lot of success jumping in there and hunting scrape lines personally. Now, there's been times where we find a dominant scrape, okay? A dominant scrape, you'll know it. It's usually back in the thick stuff, and it's usually the size of the hood of a car, okay? That's a little different ballgame. We've found those and camped out on those before, and kill good bucks. So again, during the rut, we're trying to really focus on, and again, there's a lot of factors, okay, but in general, we're trying to focus on where the doe's at and travel corridors, because they're going to be on the move, and you're going to see deer you never seen before, because they're coming from the neighbor's farm. I mean, when they're on the move, they're on the move. But one of his other questions was water. So I was further down the line, but I'm gonna bring that in here. We hunted with a guy, a good buddy of ours, Johnny O, lives in Wisconsin. For those of you who have followed Addicted for any amount of years, you've seen us hunt there for over a decade. One of the sharpest guys I know when it comes to meticulously managing whitetails. It's got a beautiful farm in Wisconsin, big farm. I want to say it's like 1,800 acres. He's owned it for 20 something years. So he's been able to completely, manage this thing how he wants. He's very particular. Nobody talks in the woods. You're on electric buggies. Like he doesn't mess around. But his place is amazing. And I learned something from Johnny O. Johnny O he did something that was just amazing. He He went up at a lot of, kind of mountain ranges in Buffalo County, Wisconsin. So what he did is he went up on all of his ridges where all these bucks, these bucks are always running these ridge tops, right? They're running these ridge tops. They're looking down. They're letting the thermals carry up. They're smelling, trying to find those hot does. They just really like those ridge tops. Well, he would go along these ridge tops and he would put these little ponds in. He would dig these little ponds, and they would be, 15, 20 foot across, 15 foot across, not real big, 3 foot deep, and where they'd hold water all year. And I mean, like I said, I learned, I got educated on water by Johnny O. Never in my life had I seen just the deer come to the water, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter how hot it was, how cold it was. It didn't matter if it rained and there was water on the ground. It didn't matter. Like they would come to this water during the rut. Obviously the does are coming to the water because they're getting run hard by bucks. The bucks would come to the water. I mean, tongues hanging out. They would get into the pond and they would stand, chest, neck deep in the water, just cooling their bodies down, just guzzling the water. And I killed, I'd say the first 10 years hunting there, I killed probably 8 bucks. And I want to say 7 were out of the stand that we called my honey hole. So 7 were out of the same stand on the same water hole. And then, 1 other buck out of the 8 I killed on another stand on a water hole. So, pay it, if there's water everywhere, that's one thing. But for those of you who own and manage your own land, put thought into strategic water holes. Man, I haven't seen much work like that. It blew me away. I mean, completely educated me on deer and water. And how much they need, and just amazing. For those of you who don't have that control, if your property's got, like a core water source somewhere, during the rut, again, we're talking about the rut phase here, that's an area I would really focus on, because if there's limited water and there's a pond somewhere, my guess is during the rut, they're going to be in there, just like they are in Wisconsin when they're, in the rut running hard, just panting, huffing and puffing. Like I said, it's just crazy the amount of deer I'd see would just come and just almost fall into the pond and stand there in chest deep, neck deep water, steam rolling off of them. I didn't care if it was 30 degrees, they were in the water and they were guzzling water. So during the rut, travel corridors, if you get lucky and find something really unique, like a dominant, scrape, the size of the hood of a car that you can just tell it's a super hot spot. And then where are the does, because that's where the bucks are going to be. So that, I'd say that's kind of a lot of our philosophies on kind of how we would scout and what we would be looking for during the rut. Okay. Terrain breaks. So terrain breaks, another lesson I learned. So for those of you who follow my other show called Spear Life, Gary Zumwalt, who's on there and co-hosts with me, one of my good buds for over 30 years. I met Gary when I was, I believe, 20 years old, and just a heck of an outdoorsman. And Gary, like Johnny O gave me a serious education on water, Gary was the guy that educated me on terrain breaks. So I had an Alabama lease. Gary wasn't in that lease. Him and his wife Gina came up to hunt with me, and my wife Gina were all great friends. I was in my early 20s, and we get there, and he's like, hey, let's go check the place out. All right. So again, early 20s. I'm gonna say trail cams probably weren't out yet. If anything was, it was brand new, and it was the 35 millimeter, takes 30 pictures, got to go get it developed, blah blah blah. So So I remember specifically on our Alabama lease, I wasn't running any cameras, and we go and do some scouting, and it was a lot. It was timber company, and there was a lot of planted pines, and we're riding, and all of a sudden Gary's like, "Oh, hey, stop!" So we stop with 4-wheelers, we hop off, and I'm like, "What is he looking at?" Rows of pine trees, right? Rows of pine trees, thick. I mean, super thick. I mean, deer tunnels going through these briars and stuff, so it's ate up with deer, but it's just like you're not hunting it. So I'm kind of saying that to Gary, and Gary's like, no. He's like, look. So we hop on forward, and he's like, look over there. And maybe 100 yards in or so, you could see some giant oaks poking up, above the pines. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, you see that? I'm like, yeah. He's like, there's a terrain break there, going from planted pines to oaks. Let's go check it out. And so we head in, and we find we're going this way and that way, trying to get through all the thick stuff, trying to find a trail in there. We finally get kind of through the thick stuff, and then boom, it opens up, and there's all these hardwoods, and there was basically where a piece of all of these planted pines had butted up to just a bunch of hardwoods. And we go in there, and the first thing we see is a primary scrape, the size of the hood of a car, which is what I saw earlier, and just rubs everywhere, and just scrumming, oh my God, it was just one of those spots whoa, you just knew right away, right? And I'm not going to get too far into the story, because I had an opportunity, the biggest buck I'd ever seen in my life, sitting in that stand the very first time. But had too much clothes on and couldn't get turned around, and blah, blah, blah. Thought he was going to bust me, and he didn't. Let him leave. He never came back. I still haunts me to this day. So, would have been my biggest buck by far. So, Gary started telling me, look, they like these terrain breaks. I mean, obviously whitetails, path of least resistance, but it's just something about a terrain break, hardwoods going to pines, whatever it is. There's just something about it that deer like to travel it. And so again, Gary gave me a big education on that. We hung I think a climber, snuck back out, marked our trail. It was in the morning. I literally went back in that afternoon, snuck in, got up my climber, and like I mentioned earlier, had an opportunity. I rattled in a monster buck. I mean, this was Alabama. This was early 90s. And, this was probably somewhere between 150, 160 inch deer, which would have just been, oh my God. I mean, it would have been my biggest deer by far. So again, that was a lesson. And then because of everything that happened and me seeing the biggest buck of my life at the time, I mean, boom, I was sold on terrain breaks. So, never discount a terrain break. If you see it, don't just jump on it because it's a terrain break, but work that terrain break and try and see if you can find the hot spot, or see if you can find the deer sign. All right. Scrapes or primary scrapes, I think we kind of touched on that already. When you're new to deer hunting, you get out in the woods, you see a rub and a scrape. It's like, hang your stand there. I mean, we've all been there a million times. I've been hunting whitetails all my life, bow hunting them all my life, doing it professionally for 21 years. So you learn, right? It's experience. So, do I love seeing a nice big rub? Yes. Do I love seeing a scrape? Yes. But again, I've never, I don't get too excited over rubs and scrapes. It's sign. It lets me know, hey, we got deer here. But I've not had a lot of luck personally. And I know there are guys that do. And I know guys that, doctor the scrapes and put drips, and they really have good luck. Just personally, bow hunting whitetails, me and GM, we just haven't had great luck jumping on a scrape or even a scrape line. I put cameras on them, and over the years, I feel like the data to me shows that, a lot of that is just happening at night. But again, you find a primary scrape, okay, and the primary scrape, you're going to know it, okay. A primary scrape is going to be big. It's going to be the size of the hood of a car. And then it's going to, there's going to be sign everywhere. It's going to be, you're going to know it's a hot spot. So I'd say with scrapes and rubs is what he's asking about. I'd say would be more of my focus than just a rub or a small scrape. All right, feeding and supplementing. Everyone's got their opinion of this. Growing up in the South, hunting Florida, Georgia, Alabama, okay, we were always allowed to run feeders. But again, I'm talking 80s and 90s. I mean, we weren't managing deer. It was just all about, it's just all about trying to shoot a deer, right? I mean, and we have pigs and stuff. So, you run feeders because it's like, man, you always go out there and if you don't, man, if you don't shoot a deer, you shoot a pig. So my philosophy has definitely evolved, hunting as long as I have, and then doing it for, professionally now for 21 years. I'm definitely a big believer, in supplementing. I think off season, given given the deer the protein and the minerals that they need. I mean, I've seen it just firsthand way too many times, whether it's with us or the million guys we know in the industry that are all, really good deer hunters. They do this stuff for a living. We've just seen too often that, if you give them what they need early, just the antler growth and the difference from this year to that year. So, obviously if you have the ability to supplement your deer, my first reaction would be focus on giving them the protein and the minerals that they need at the times of the year that they need it. As far as just hunting over pile of corn, I'm not, I'm not against it. I grew up doing it. I'm not per se for it. As I've gotten older, my preference just personally is not that we don't do it sometimes, because we do. I mean, sometimes, we hunt with outfitters like Kentucky early season, and I mean, they're just, the deer aren't coming there if you don't have corn out. I mean, that's how they hunt. They've been conditioned, like Kentucky and Kansas. They've just been conditioned, right? They just come to the deer piles. So it's just not that we don't do it, but it's, my preference, is definitely, I like getting in there and figuring them out, especially bow hunting. I like getting in there and figuring them out, right? And killing a good one. My preference is not to hunt over corn personally, but we do it. I mean, especially since we do this for a living and it's our job and we got to go get it done. We're hunting certain states with certain guys like Kansas, Kentucky. That's what we're doing. That's how they hunt in those states. So that's my thoughts on feeding. Obviously, food plots. I mean, it depends on what you can get into, but obviously, if you have the ability to, plant food plots and, and then obviously mix it in the protein and the minerals, anything you can give that whitetail that he needs, especially year round, I can tell you two things. Number one, it's going to benefit the deer, and number two, it's going to hold deer on your property. Okay, deer are going to, just like pressure. Okay, deer are going to gravitate towards areas that aren't pressured. People always say, why do you see so many deer on the side of the road? There's so many deer standing on the side of the road. Well, they know they're not getting hunted on the side of the road. So they just understand, they get a feel for where the pressure is, and pressure is everything. It's people want to, we do seminars for Cabela's and Bass Pro and all these places, and we always do Q&A with the fans, and it's just like, it's amazing how everybody wants to talk about deer management and food and this and that, but it's like nobody asks about pressure, and pressure is probably the most important thing. I've hunted places like Johnny O's, Wisconsin, where the deer just are not, there's no pressure, and they're like hunting different species. The reality of it is a lot of people will go their whole lives hunting deer, and they'll never experience hunting whitetails, in a completely just in a non-pressure environment. They're a different animal. Obviously pressure is a big thing. If you've got the food and the water and the things that deer needs, especially throughout the year, you're going to hold more deer. So not only are they getting what they need, not only will you get that, larger antler growth quicker, but you're going to hold deer on your property. So his last those trail cameras, I think we've covered trail cameras, pretty heavy. They're our number one scouting tool. We use Browning trail cameras. We have since they come out. I could tell you horror story on top of horror story on top of horror story from early in our careers using cameras that just were not, some, camera name brands you would recognize. I'm not going to mention, but for me and Gene, cameras failing was a killer, because we had a lot of farms that we put cameras out, July, and then we may roll in, November, and now we got 5 days to get it done. And so, we our cameras, we have, depending on how big the property, blah, 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 maybe we have 25 cameras out. Well, we'd get into camp, and that evening we'd go we'd go swap cards and check every single camera, come back to camp. And that's what we did before cell cams. We'd sit around and we'd go through all those cameras. We'd look at last few days or, last week on every one of those cameras. And then we'd figure out, okay, Dave, you're hunting here tomorrow. I'm hunting here tomorrow. That's how we figured it out. Of course, for cell cams, it's a whole lot easier now. So for us, if we, I remember one year we got to Kansas and we went and pulled all of our cameras, and this is way before Browning. I'm gonna, again, doesn't matter who it is, but we got in, we were running one brand of camera, and we went and pulled all of our cameras, and we had over a 50% fail rate. Okay, so if you've leased your own property in Kansas and you're paying for everything, and you're relying 100% on those cameras to do your job, and you get into Kansas that night and you pull 25 cameras, 30 cameras, and you've got over a 50% fail rate, it's tough. Hopefully you've got some things on the other cameras and you can get it done. If not, you're starting from scratch. We went to, that's one of the reasons we went to Browning trail cameras, was we had a lot of confidence in Browning from past experience with other things. And once we went to the Browning cameras, our fail rate went to pretty much nothing. It was amazing, really, at just to go and have, 30 cameras out and pretty much 30 cameras working. Very few problems. So that's why we're still with them, 14 years later. So again, that's our number one scouting tool. So I think that answered all of his questions. Again, trying to give some good information without blabbing on for 2 hours, but obviously, hopefully this will spur other questions that we can keep kicking the ball down the court. So I think we'll call it for today, and appreciate you guys either listening or watching on our YouTube channel. This has been Straight Talk with Jon Brunson.